So this is one of my favorite philosophers online. So let's go.
Right. You know the drill. You've sent me the worst philosophical takes that you've ever come across so that I can have a go at defending them. So let's get started. My name is Joe Foley, and this is Unsolicited Advice. Okay, here is a bad philosophy take from Sigilligus, and it reads, all truth is subjective. I've had people tell me this IRL with a straight face.
Oh my God. This is one of the first parts. So I've been writing a book for many years now, and the first part of my book is dedicated to this philosophical claim that I think is rampant in most of your average person's belief system. So most people think, well, it's just your perspective. Your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth, and it is like a virus, a mental virus that people believe, and it's killing us.
The idea that all truth is subjective, I think, possibly falls into the camp of deepities. This is a term that I'd only come across pretty recently, actually. It's essentially a phrase that sounds very deep, but on closer inspection either seems to fall apart or just doesn't seem to have that much in it. In this case, I would argue that all truth is subjective is ultimately just a deepity. In practice, it's not a coherent position to hold because... Exactly.
You cannot walk around believing that nothing is true, or there's no thing that's really actually true. Because if you believed that, then why are you doing anything at all? So how does it affect you in the world? Why are you doing anything? You can't go to the shower because you don't believe there's such thing as a shower, let alone that you're dirty or that it's the end of the day. And because everything that you're experiencing is just a subjective truth, none of it's true, so it doesn't matter. And then you go, but that's my subjective truth, so then I can act on that. And then what does that mean? What does that even mean? So, okay, cool. So you believe it's true, personally? Yes. Okay. What does that mean? If it's not true ultimately, what does it matter? Yeah.
If you think that all truth is subjective, then there's just the standard comeback of, right, well, is that truth subjective?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the main one. If you say subjective truth is the only truth, you're claiming that the only truth is what you just said. Because you just made a claim. Subjective truth is the only thing that's true. There's no objective truth, just subjective truth. That claim is an objective truth statement, and so it can't work. It means like it's as if you're saying you found a math equation, and the math equation tells you that all math doesn't exist. It doesn't work. Math doesn't make any sense. Then how can you trust that equation because it's telling you that equation is wrong?
If it is, then there's no reason why we should expect it to hold universally. And if it's not, then you have one example of something that isn't subjectively true, something that is objectively true, in which case the statement just refutes itself. So
yes,
there is a sense in which this is kind of one of the ultimate bad philosophy takes, in that it just straightforwardly entails its own falsity or its own unseriousness, for want of a better word. I do, however, think that it does contain some kind of insight in it. I think that when most people say all truth is subjective, what they're trying to get at is the idea that everyone is talking from a perspective, and that perspective is going to be informed by their particular personal history. Like, I think that there are certain interpretations of Nietzsche's perspectivalism that fall roughly along these lines. And in as much as somebody's just trying to express that, I actually think this is a very good point. The other thing that I would say, just regarding subjectivity more generally, and I recently wrote a blog post about this, is that I think that quite a lot of the time when people talk about...
I mean, yeah, like everyone has a perspective. Doesn't mean your perspective is right. It can mean that you are emotionally attached to it because your experiences and your thoughts are holding on to this idea as truth. But one of the best things you can do is free yourself from, like, if everyone could understand that there are true things and there are false things, and we can be okay with being wrong, like, oh my gosh, conversations would be so much easier in real time, because you guys are just trying to figure out what's true rather than just believing. Because when someone believes that their truth is right, that's fine, and no problem. But when they act like it doesn't matter whether my truth is right or yours is right, it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of time talking with people that don't care to know what's actually true. And usually one of the reasons why they're like that is because they believe it doesn't ultimately matter anyways. It's just your opinion, I have mine, it's all good.
Something being subjective or objective. They often are trying to get at whether a concept is stable or unstable as it appears between persons. That sounds a bit abstract, but the debate that got me thinking about this was this idea of, can we have objective goodness without God? And it's often taken for granted that with God you can have objective goodness. I've critiqued that position in the past anyway, but there is a more trivial critique.
Okay, I shouldn't interject here, but my understanding of God is that goodness is the same thing as God. So the idea of the ultimate good is the same thing as the idea of God. Or did I say that right? Ultimate good is ultimate God. It's just conceptually exactly the same. The more you try to unravel what an ultimate good would be, the more you discover you're running into the same definition of God. So if there is such thing as good and it's on a scale and there's an ultimate version and an infinite maxing out of that, then that is God, the idea of God. So it's a weird question to say, because if you said it my way, it'd be very weird, because you'd be saying, does an ultimate good rely on an ultimate good existing? Yes, because they're the same thing. Yeah.
You can level at something like divine command theory, which is the idea that what is moral is determined by God's will, which is to say that that doesn't establish objective moral truths. It establishes subjective moral truths. They're just subjective to the will of God. And I think one of the reasons why this response basically seems trivial is because if something is true in God's will, and God is the creator and governor of the universe, then in effect you have a stable notion of truth. It doesn't vary between individuals, because while it's relative to God's will is sort of intuitively the most important will, and at the very least it's not like we have different morals between different people. You get a kind of quasi-objectivity of morality, even if you don't get at true objective morality as...
Yes, narratively, yes. But if goodness and truth, which is what I think, are the same concept of God, because truth is what is, and truth is reality, and nothing can be true besides what's true, because that's what's true. Right? So truth itself is the existence of everything, and that's very definitionally like what God is, which is the highest good thing. Then it's not subjective to God's will, because it's like saying truth is subjective to what's true. It's like, yes. Yes, it is relative to what's true. It is dictated by truth. Again, depending on your definitions of these words, which I obviously have some differences of definition to Joseph here, these seem like not good questions.
You would in something like, I don't know, Platonic theories of moral realism, where what is moral is determined apart from any mind, including apart from the mind of God. And this got me thinking that I think the same thing holds for lots of other debates that are, in popular discourse at least, framed around subjectivity and objectivity. We tend to equate subjectivity with loads and loads of variance between individual people and objectivity with invariance between people. And that does hold for objectivity. If something is objective, that is, it's not dependent on the existence of any mind or...
I really find it interesting, subjective truths. Like actual... Because if you believe in objective truth, you also believe usually in subjective truth. Subjective truth is so fascinating to me, because I love both, where people are different and where people are the same. I think both of those things are super fascinating, because when you find something where everyone's the same, it helps you to build like big maps so you can understand, everyone's going to react this way, everyone's going to do this, and that's super helpful for like building structure in life. But then also, if you start discovering spots in human nature where everyone's different, that's super interesting. Why is that interesting? Because it can also help you build a map in understanding the world, where you know that yes, everyone does this thing, but when it comes to this, everyone is different. And then the question is like, how does that occur? How do those differences become so wildly arrayed and so vastly different between one another? And those differences can also challenge the overall narrative, the overall worldview that you have. And I think some of the most interesting things and frustrating things is where things are not uniform, because it just allows for things to shake up what you think you know. But sometimes it's easy to explain.
Any collection of minds, then yes, it won't vary between people because it doesn't really have any relation to those people. At least not a kind of metaphysical grounding relation. It exists independently. But the converse doesn't necessarily hold of subjectivity. Something can be mind dependent and yet still not vary all that much between individuals. Mm-hmm. I think that a really good example of this is something like pain. So there are lots of discussions online and in popular discourse and in philosophy journals about whether we have objective concepts of beauty or aesthetics or something like that. And I think that's partly because beauty and interpretations of beauty do tend to vary a little bit between people. This doesn't happen with something like pain. And I suspect that this is because, for all intents and purposes, our experience of pain is practically convergent. And by this, I mean that, except for a few exceptional cases, we broadly seem to perceive and act pain in roughly similar ways. One exception to this might be something like a monk self-immolating, right? When a monk pours gasoline over themselves and lights himself on fire and then seemingly just sits there until they die. That is one of the few times where we can ask questions like, oh, is that monk really in pain? I think that kind of alerts us to the fact that pain definitely is subjective, because if there were no minds, there would also be no pain. Well, it could be variant between people, but practically it's invariant. If it is variant, it very rarely comes up, and variation in things like perceived beauty come up significantly more often. So I suppose one way that you could really steelman the idea that all truth is subjective would be to say,
oh my goodness, so many thoughts I'm having. Is this a flurry? Because like, what can any experience that you have in a moment be experienced by someone else? Like it can't even be experienced by you again in the same way. You have similar experiences, but I don't even get that. Yes, if the question is, does pain exist as an objective truth? What? Yes, pain exists in the world as an objective experience. Yes, because you're basing the fact on the fact that is someone experiencing that thing. Yes, that's there. So an objective truth of a subjective experience. And so did that person subjectively experience something that the person next to them was not experiencing? Yes. How to understand, I'm a bit lost what he's saying exactly. I have one. So I do a lot of these like little tests where I'll ask a question to many people and I'll see what the answers are. And some of the questions have remarkably like similar answers, and then sometimes people vary from the answer that everyone else is giving, and then there'll be this new answer that pops up. And if I ask it enough times, a third answer will pop up, but then it might only range between those three examples. So there's a question I always ask, and it's, so I tell a story. I start to tell a story. I build a scene for you, and I say, the wolf stands on his rock. What happens next? And then in that moment, you can answer, you can comment what you think, and tell me. And whatever your answer was, and it's very important that you pick the answer that appeared to you. There are a couple answers that everyone gives. And then I even learned that depending on what time of day or night it was, in their mind, changes the outcome of what the wolf does next. So if it's nighttime, he howls at the moon, or he just howls, and there's no moon in their picture, but it's the same action. The other one is he jumps off his rock, and that's daytime. And when they do that, I ask them, what do they do next after they jump off the rock? Because I was just curious. And all of them say he goes to hunt. And some people just say he goes to hunt instead of he jumps off the rock. So there are like a couple variations, but when people imagine, it happens automatically into like this skew, this funnel. The other thing is that you didn't tell your imagination what to do. Your imagination just presented you with an image, which is such an interesting phenomena. And some people can't even see that. So, there are different minds, and some people can't see their images in their mind. So if you tell someone to picture an apple, they're like, oh, I can't picture an apple. However, I believe it's still happening somewhere in like a very smoky, unconscious part of their brain that they don't have like conscious access to, but it's definitely occurring, and they're definitely picking up on it. So that's what I think. And then other people can see images that pop up into their head, but most people don't notice it's happening while it's happening. Otherwise it would spook us out a bit more. It's a bit weird. I think it is such a new part of our brain that it is able to create visualizations and imagine, and not just imagine in our brain, but imagine in the real world, and put 3D objects in the world with our holographic projection mechanisms in our mind. Because it's so new, it's less real compared to like this mic that's in front of me. I don't have the same ability to create an image as the thing in front of me. And then also it's hard to even recognize that it's in front of me, which is like, so you're talking, someone's talking, images are popping up in your mind of correlating ideas, correlating images, correlating sounds. Stimulation is going in, and some feedback is happening in your mind. But that feedback, it takes a back seat in our mind, so we don't even see. And as I'm telling you, that's so amazing that it's happening, that you're seeing things and you're never even noticing it. It's like in the real world, if something moves like beside you, your head turns because you need to react, because you've got a system in you that needs to react to that fact. But you have a lot of very important things that are going on in your mind that you're not even noticing. And if you took more care in paying it attention, you might get a lot of in the moment wisdom that you're missing out on. And so what ends up happening with that information is it gets translated into your, absorbed by your subconscious and by your feelings. And it sets off little vibes and energies and lets you know how to act. But it's a much more distilled version of the original thought. If you were to see it consciously and be able to evaluate those thoughts, whole different thing. Anyways, we're still reacting.
Something like this. Truth is a linguistically defined concept, and in as much as it is linguistically defined, you could not have truth without the existence of people or consciousness. You would have reality, sure, but there would be no truth.
Those two words are exactly synonymous. You can replace the word reality, and watch, she'll start talking about it. You can replace the word reality with truth every single time. It means the same thing. You can replace the word truth with reality every single time. The annoying thing is language is so interesting because different words. I remember learning this in like a very shit TAFE course, but they said something really interesting in like a English class or whatever. Every word has different energy. It can mean the exact same thing, but the images that are associated with those words are vastly different. So if you say thin or skinny or fat or chubby, they have like different energy. Say hungry or starving, right? Yeah, all the words that you can use, that you can choose to use, carry with it a mental picture or like an energetic picture of what that word means. And reality happens to fill out this like the sky. Well, I know this for me, so I haven't actually asked people, but I know what it means for me is more cosmos, more cosmic energy, like reality, right? It's this big thing that holds the universe together. In the exact same way, that is truth. Truth is that big thing holding everything together. It is what is. It is what is real. It is true. The true things that exist, right? Reality and truth are exactly the same. But truth, when you use the word truth, you mean it. You use it in different contexts of sentences. But you can have synonymous sentences, and I say this all the time. If I said the words, the truth of the matter is, that would be the same as the fact of the matter is, right? The fact and truth. But then if I said the reality of the matter is, still works. And even the word matter and situation, because you say the reality of the situation is. Same sentence.
True statements, because there wouldn't be any statements at all. There would be no true propositions because there wouldn't be propositions, at least.
So what Joe is saying is that truth is propositional. It's a language. It's only in language that you can say that there's truth. There would be no propositions, but the propositions, it's like math. Math is not, so there's the linguistic term, mathematics, and there's what it's describing. I had a conversation about this with someone recently. Math is created by humans, right? 1 and plus and 1 and equals and 2. Each one of those systems. 1 sec. But what mathematics equations are trying to describe are concepts in the real world. So mathematics exists outside of any human being's existence. It is discovered by humans, not created by humans. So same way, truth is not invented by humans. It's discovered.
Not how we traditionally conceive of them. If that's true, then true. If that's true, then you do end up with a situation where truth is subjective. However, in this model of the universe, you could also say that because reality definitely exists as its own thing, if you do have minds, they're going to converge on the same concept of truth, because we need to figure out what reality actually looks like in order to interact with it and succeed in our goals.
Okay, so I said that we could change the word truth with reality.
Minds, they're going to converge on the same
Let's go back.
Be propositions, at least not how we traditionally conceive of them. If that's true, then...
And in that sense, when you say true, you would say if that's real, right? Because real is true, right? And what's real is what is, which is what is being. So if reality is being, it's all like describing the same idea.
True. If that's true, then you do end up with a situation where truth is subjective. However, in this model of the universe, you could also say that because reality definitely exists as it's...
So because reality is real, because reality exists, because truth exists, because truth is true...
its own thing. If you do have minds, they're going to converge on the same concept of truth, because...
Yeah, you can just swap these words. They're the same thing. Because if something is real, that means that it's true, right?
We need to figure out what reality actually looks like in order to interact with it and succeed in our goals. This would be a kind of very loose modern pragmatist story.
I wonder how old the word reality. When was the word reality invented? Created? Yeah, see? Earliest evidence for the word from before 1530. It's pretty new. Right? Oh wait. Oh, when did the English language, when 5th century? Oh, so yeah, it's pretty new. Okay. The word is derived, signifies the quality of being real or having an actual existence. So that which is existing is real, and that is what is true, right? Because true is what is. It is what it is. That's what it is. And one sec.
I suppose. I've talked about this before, but the pragmatist philosopher Hasok Chang made like a brief observation in his most recent book, which was Realism for Realistic People. At least I think it's his most recent book. Maybe he's written one when I wasn't paying attention. He's a brilliant philosopher, by the way. Everyone should go check him out. And he, almost in passing, makes this brilliant yet, on reflection, really obvious point that just because something is subjective or mind-dependent doesn't mean that it's mind-controlled. Again, pain is a fantastic example of this. Apart from a very few cases, people don't tend to be able to think their way out of excruciating pain. But the pain is definitely dependent on the existence of their mind. And many other types of phenomena in the almost Kantian sense might be like this. One of the underrated questions, I think, in the philosophy of beauty, which philosophers and anthropologists and social scientists do explore, but it doesn't filter down into popular discourse enough, in my opinion, is the question of, are there convergent ideals of beauty between people within a society and between societies? This doesn't mean that all societies will end up with the same idea of beauty, as that's definitely not true. But it could be that there are some consistent through lines. Some psychologists have proposed that one of those through lines might be beautiful natural landscapes. That they propose some kind of evolutionary theory whereby we are relaxed by the presence of broad light.
I guess okay, so if that's what we mean by objective truth when it comes to pain and beauty, it's that pain is painful and that beauty is beautiful. But the funny thing is that there is so much interesting divergence on what people think is beautiful. And there's that obvious quote, which is, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yes. But there's such an interesting amount of beauty that is the same for everyone. Such a large proportion of what we think is beautiful is transferable, is universal, and people all agree.
Looking,
and that's so complicated. Why is that the case? Because what's interesting about what's objective is it's transcendent beyond any individual, which means it's true. It's more true, more times, which means it's grander and greater. Like it's more true, more of the time, which is crazy.
Natural land masses or something like that. And if that's true, then that does tell you something that, in my opinion, is pretty philosophically significant, because it would mean that even if beauty were subjective in the sense that it depends on everyone's minds, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is free to have their own idea of beauty. It could be that there is empirical convergence there. So that would be my most defensible version of the idea that all truth is subjective. But at the same time, that really does take the wind out of the sails of the proposition, right? We have effectively turned what would initially seemed like it was going to say that, yeah, all of our ideas about truth are just fundamentally wrong and truth can vary between people, has just ended up being that the existence of statements depends on the existence of minds. And that there's not as much meat on the bones of that philosophical thesis.
I don't understand his conclusion that the existence of statements, yes. I think what he's saying is because before he said that truth itself is dependent on minds, which is not true, but the ability to say a truth is dependent on minds. So, what did I miss? What's so interesting about that? I guess there are differences in what people like and don't like, and that means finding out what is the most likable thing is quite a hard thing to perceive, or the most good thing is a very hard thing to perceive because of that divergence, which leads people to say that just because you believe, it's basically the idea of saying that people worship different gods because that which is ultimately good is slightly different in everyone's mind.
Don't get me wrong, I still think that it is actually quite significant. And if you accepted it, it would have implications for how you approached the world and certainly how you approach certain philosophical problems. But nonetheless, it wouldn't be as earth-shakingly shattering as the idea that everyone can have their own individual truth.
Yeah.
If you want to help me make more videos like this, then please consider subscribing, either to the channel or if you want to get access to exclusive content, to the Patreon. The links are in the description. Sorry about this. I'm going to have to do the next few in my glasses because my contact lenses were causing me far too much grief. So for the next few, you've got Nerd Joe. Anyway.
Hey, we've got that in common.
Our next philosophical bad take is from PT5 Shorts, and it reads, "Everyone is religious in some way. Brackets, an atheist of atheists." Now, this has become a very popular talking point, and I think it probably...
Something that I believe. I believe that there's a big disconnect between what people say they believe and what they actually believe. And in large part, it's very obvious because in certain circumstances, when you're talking with someone, especially someone who's intellectual or able to articulate ideas and points and concepts, and some that they've claimed that they ascribe to, what ends up happening is that in another context of another conversation, not even minutes apart, can be like just we start talking about this thing over here. The cognitive dissonance is so vast that all of the things that you were saying before don't make sense over here, right? That's what cognitive dissonance is. But one of those things would be subjective, that the idea that everything is subjective and there's no objective reality, just subjective reality. The funny thing about that is a lot of the time they'll be saying that, and then we'll move over into, do you think it's true that you should have the vaccine, or do you think it's true that you should have this? And they say, yes, it's true. And I'm like, well, didn't you say 3 minutes ago that you believed that nothing was true? And then in the next conversation, it doesn't matter anymore. That in that same way, a lot of people who are non-religious throw it all out, and intellectually they can make it all make sense, but then in action they act as if I had asked, like, if you were to ask what believing in a god would do to you, like with your actions, a lot of people everyone lives as if there is some kind of moral hierarchy and there's a transcendent value of morality. It's not just law dependent. The law can be bad, which means that you're getting it from a higher place, and it's like this sense of ultimate good, which is in essence non-atheistic, because what the hell is an ultimate good?
It always has been amongst religious apologists. The thing is, I think it fundamentally trades on an equivocation of definitions, because in some sense, they're right? If you broaden the definition of religious to basically include anything you care about or think is right or motivates you to action or you find personally meaningful, then yeah, I guess there's a sense in which every atheist holds some kind of religious view. But we've also stretched the definition of religion so far that it kind of doesn't resemble our common sense usage. So I mentioned this in my video.
Okay, so the common sense usage that he's referring to is when you ask someone, are you religious? Now you've shrunk the definition down to an appropriate size, which means, do you follow a text, or do you go to a church? Do you attend some kind of, do you fulfill any religious practices, anything like that? Now, sometimes that's too strict, but it is the most common usage because it's how your average person will express religion consciously. But for me, for example, I wouldn't fit in that because I would say, yes, I'm religious, but do you do any of those things? I would say, no. I don't go to church. I don't do anything that classically would be seen as a religious, what a religious person does. The only things that I do that are religious is believe in a God, act as if it's real, as in I try to use it as an anchor mentally and psychologically to function. Sometimes I have to communicate with it, with God, so that I can reorient myself. But it's all very psychological and very internal and spiritual, rather than religious practice that most people would say that would qualify you as religious. So all I'm saying is that that common usage is very useful, and understandably he's making the point that it shouldn't be broadened too far, that it encompasses everything. But at the same time, sometimes that common usage isn't even sufficient to capture people who truly are religious. And again, when people are saying everyone is religious, I guess what we're saying is that though not consciously do you act in manners that reflect religiosity, actively you do without their conscious recognition, because there are faith statements and or whatever reasons that you have inside of you that cause you to act that are religious. But then if that's what, so the funny thing about that is, if being religious is what saves you spiritually, and then everyone is religious, then what's the point of religion? No point. Every human's going to be religious, so they're all saved, and it's mute.
Video on Jordan Peterson's Jubilee appearance, where he sort of tried to do a similar thing with the concept of worship. His claim was that all atheists worship something, and then when he was asked, what do you mean by worship, which is a fair enough question in this context, he said, well, you worship whatever is at the top of your value hierarchy. In which case, yes, everyone worships something, but also we've so watered down the definition of worship that it doesn't resemble how you'd use the term worship in a religious context. The reason that I think this kind of argument is still valuable to look at, even though I think it's wrong, is that a really good way to tell whether you're equivocating on a definition is to play out its inferential consequences. The inferential consequence of all atheists are religious, if we use religious in its everyday sense, that is, belonging to a major religion or worshipping some kind of deity, the implication of all of that is that every single atheist secretly worships some kind of personal, transcendent being. I just don't think that's plausible, right? You can test that statement via its implications and seeing whether those implications are true, and it just turns out that all atheists are religious under that interpretation is straightforwardly false. If you broaden the interpretation of religious to mean worshipping something or deeming something as important or having some kind of felt existential meaning in life, then yes, pretty much every atheist will end up as religious, but that no longer tells you anything significant about atheism. The idea behind all atheists are religious, as far as I can tell, is to sort of catch the atheist in a bind, right? You're going to say something like, you say you're an atheist, you say you don't believe in any religions, and yet deep down you too are religious. But if you're using religious in exactly the same way, then that's going to then translate as you say that you don't believe in any kind of meaning and you never feel anything and you don't worship or prioritize anything, but you do those things, to which the atheist can then respond by saying, look, I never claimed that there was no such thing as meaning or felt meaning, or that there was no such thing as worshipping something. I never claimed that I didn't have any kind of value system for my life. I wouldn't even be able to act if I didn't have some kind of value system.
So what are you claiming? This is a big moment.
it really does diffuse the critique in that sense. So there is a trivial sense in which all atheists, or almost all atheists, are religious. But I think when you play out the inferential consequences of that more plausible version, you tend to find that it just doesn't have any kind of relevance anymore. It kind of becomes true, but it also at the same time doesn't have any kind of bearing on discussions of atheism or religion, and it certainly doesn't catch the atheist in a bind. So yeah, in some sense...
No. Oh, man, I wish he went a little bit deeper there, because he said, I'm not claiming this. So if he could articulate what it is exactly claiming, that would be really helpful. Why? Because there is something hidden there in those two clashes of mine, of the person who's saying everyone is religious, and the person who's saying, oh, well, now it's so broad that it doesn't mean anything. Yes, I believe in all those things, right? The person who really understands that everyone is religious and is trying to communicate that to the non-religious claimer, the atheist, is trying to say that, hey, what those things are exactly what we are describing, and there's revelation to be found in that understanding. But if it's too messy for the person who's an atheist to, like, if it's not a bridge they can walk across, if there's no logical pathway for them to get from it's just meaning and values and I worship something, sure, but that doesn't mean I'm not an atheist, then they'll never be able to connect the dots. So there's like a missing link somewhere in those two problems. So what do I think? I think that God is not like, so we may be talking about different things, because what I find a lot of atheists do is they are fighting a battle with a type of Christian, a type of way of thinking about God. And I think that is the most common use version of God. The common man's God is a specific version, right? A specific understanding. And most people are able to function as a religious person with that version of God. Maybe unsophisticated, unexplored, maybe basic, but it's functional. The idea of God is functional enough. But those with those basic understanding of what a God is can get eviscerated by someone who's been thinking about it from the opposite side. Now, with a different hold on. I think, wait. What was I saying? Something so important. Oh yeah. So now, but instead, if you have a different version of God, right? A little bit more complicated, a little bit more complex. I don't think that's the version of God that someone like Unsolicited Advice, Joe, is fighting. Why? Because so say you do worship something. There's this concept in religion about worshipping the true God, right? And if you were to say that, okay, so everyone, what Jordan Peterson said, like everyone's worshipping a God, there's an interesting thought to be having there. So if it is true that everyone's worshipping something, right, that thing we could conceive of putting it into a category of either the true God or a false God, right? And most people are obsessed when they think about this, true God and a false God, of gods between religions. So is it Allah, or is it the Jewish God, or is the Jewish God the same God as the one of the New Testament? Is Jesus God, and or is it the pagans, or is it is it a polytheistic worldview? Are all gods real? Are you worshipping the right God, right? So, if that is the case, that we're all worshipping something, I don't think it's about which religion you belong to, which God from which religion. I think it's a deeper idea than that, which is that your version of God is never actually going to be sufficient to map onto who God truly is. And so you're always worshipping a false God because you don't understand God, and so your picture is not even him, right? So does it make it pointless? Is there any point worshipping a God if you can't even worship the correct one? But there's another emphasis in religious texts of getting to know God, or coming to see him more and more, see his greatness, understand him. So if God is reality and God is truth, then the more we understand truth and reality, the more we discover, the closer we are getting to seeing God or knowing God, right? But what does that mean for you individually? To look at the thing that you worship and see if it is in line with good. Because what you're worshipping is what you put at the top of the hierarchy, which is the most good thing. And so you can be a Satanist because you believe that the idea of Satan and all that makes up that is good. I should worship that. You can worship your money. You can worship your career. You can worship your ego, your own ego. You can worship lust. You can worship a version of God, and it's deceived in some way. And it's inevitably deceived in some way. But your job as a human adventuring in spirituality is to refine yourself on this ever-long journey of discovering who God is. So it's something like that, which is that we all have this, you have to have a God, something that you are placing as God. It's not God himself. It's what you've placed on the throne. It's very difficult because at the same time, we also got the conversation of whether there is a God. So this is what I would say: an atheist has a God. Okay, and that God is is like the thing that holds them together and pushes them in certain directions. And you'll hear a lot of Christians say, I know non-Christians that are way more Christian than Christians. And that's for the same reason, is because someone is orientated so well towards true God that they actually end up behaving better than all the other people around them that are supposedly Christians and believers. Because Christian and believers doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make you better. And if Christianity doesn't make you better, what's the point? Right? And I think it's an interesting point. So the fact that everyone has these mechanisms in there, these compasses, these directional pointers that point them towards what is good, that is a religious mechanism. So even more interesting is that people have the compass and then point it towards things that are clearly not good. That's what's interesting. When they choose to put, they're like, fair enough, there's people that are trying to be good and they're getting it wrong and they're making mistakes. They have to realign and there's a journey and all that. But then there's people that are actively pointing their gun the wrong way, pointing their ship the wrong way. and they know it. And that's weird. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm so sure they would think that what I'm doing is sneaky, but I don't think it is. I think it's just factual and exactly right. Yeah, let's see if he's got anything last to say, but I don't think he does.
This take is either bad or trivial. That's never a good place to be when you're writing a philosophical argument. And I know, because I've been there many, many times. But moving on. So...
Okay, so I'll stop it there. Those two are really interesting. However, I think you got to think about that one.